I never imagined that the simple act of exchanging my impeccable suit for a polo shirt and a badge could be so electrifying. It was my first day as Eddie, a newly hired IT assistant at Reynolds Tech, and adrenaline was pumping through my veins. Upon entering the building, a mix of excitement and nervousness overwhelmed me. The company, which I had built with so much effort, now became an unknown maze. As I walked through the lobby, I noticed that the white, modern walls were filled with pictures of teams and achievements, but what really captured my attention were the faces of the employees. They were absorbed in their tasks, with expressions that varied between concentration and tiredness. The atmosphere was vibrant, but there was a shadow of tension hanging in the air. "Hi, you must be the new assistant." A woman with brown hair and light eyes approached. "I'm Julia. I'll show you where you'll work." "Hi, Julia. Nice to meet you." "I'm excited to get started," I replied, trying to hide my nervousness. Julia had a warm smile, but the lightness in her eyes seemed to contrast with the seriousness she felt in the room. She took me to a room full of computers and cables. "This is where the magic happens. But to be honest, not everything is so glamorous. The team is overworked and sometimes there is no recognition for our work." "Ah, I see," I murmured as I looked around. The room was a bit messy, with piles of papers and empty coffee mugs. "What do you think could change that?" Julia sighed. "Well, communication with management is virtually non-existent. We often feel like our concerns are ignored. It's frustrating." The conversation quickly made me reflect on the culture I had created at the company. I had always been so focused on numbers and profits that I had perhaps neglected the human aspect that held the team together. "That must be difficult," I commented, trying to put myself in her shoes. "How do you deal with this pressure every day?" She smiled, a little sad. "Sometimes I just try to keep busy. But there are days when the load is heavy. And then there's Mark, one of our colleagues, who is really struggling with this. He's been facing personal problems, and the pressure of work is only getting worse." "Can I help you in any way?" I asked, genuinely interested. "You're new here, Eddie, but if you can just listen, that helps." As soon as the working day started, I dove into the tasks, trying to familiarize myself with the systems. However, as the day progressed, I realized that the team's exhausting routine was not just a matter of workload. As I observed the interactions between managers and employees, I noticed an atmosphere of discontent. There was a time when one of the managers made a sarcastic joke about a project that had failed. "If you can't handle that, maybe you're not cut out to work here," he said, laughing mockingly. An employee's eyes filled with tears, and my heart sank. How could I, a billionaire, allow such a toxic environment to take hold in my company? What had I missed along the way? "Hey, Eddie," a colleague called. "Did you see what happened?" That wasn't the first time he's spoken like that. And the worst thing is that, instead of solving the problems, he just makes jokes. "It's complicated. Everyone here deserves respect," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I think things need to change. You're new. I hope you don't get discouraged." "We get used to it," he said, shrugging. But his expression showed that the situation bothered him. The day passed, but the tension never left my mind. The conversations I had with Julia and colleagues left me uneasy. What else would I discover about my own company? What else was hidden beneath the surface? I knew I was about to embark on a journey that would change not only my perspective, but also the destiny of everyone at Reynolds Tech. And deep down, the question that echoed in my mind was, how far would I be willing to go to discover the truth? I was starting to feel more comfortable as Eddie, the new IT assistant, but there was something that deeply unsettled me. That day, I decided to approach Mark, a colleague who I noticed was struggling to balance his work responsibilities and personal issues that were affecting his performance. He always seemed carried with a subtle tension, as if the entire world rested on his shoulders. "Hi, Mark. Do you have a moment?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I approached him in the break room. He raised his head in surprise and hesitated for a moment. "Sure, Eddie. What do you need?" "I just wanted to know how you are. I noticed you're a little overwhelmed. Can I help you with anything?" I wasn't sure how to broach the subject, but genuine concern was written all over my face. Mark sighed. looking down at the coffee cup he held as if it was the only thing keeping him upright. It's complicated. I'm dealing with some issues at home, and honestly, work isn't helping. I know what it's like. Sometimes everything feels like a burden. If you need someone to vent to, I'm here, I offered, feeling that maybe a genuine connection could make a difference. Thanks, Eddie. It's good to know you care. He smiled, but there was still a hint of concern in his eyes. Sometimes, I feel so alone here, you know? It's like no one really understands the pressure we're under. I understand. I felt it too. The pressure to deliver results is heavy, and it seems like our managers don't see what we're going through. My mind wandered to the meeting I attended the previous morning, where a manager had dismissed employees' concerns. I think we all need a space to talk about this. Mark nodded, his expression changing to one of recognition. Exactly. Sometimes I feel like we're just here to fill a number. Like our voices don't matter. Let's do something about it. We can talk about it more, maybe even get more people together and see if we can be heard? I suggested, excited by the idea. Do you really think this could work? He asked, hope beginning to shine in his eyes. It can't hurt to try, right? I truly believe that if we united our voices, we could bring issues that were being ignored to light. Let's meet later and think of a plan. The conversation with Mark made me more determined, but as I began to plan how to approach the situation, I realized that the company culture was completely out of balance. Upon entering the meeting room that afternoon, the atmosphere was tense. The managers sat at a long table, and I, as always, placed myself in an inconspicuous position at the back. Soon, one of the managers began discussing the financial results. We need to increase productivity, and if that means laying off some of you, then so be it. His words echoed through the room, and I felt my heart quicken. How could someone be so insensitive? But what about team morale? People are working hard, and that can't be ignored. One of the employees interjected, his voice shaky but full of courage. It's not my problem. It's the numbers that matter. If you're not hitting your targets, there's no room for feelings here, the manager replied, with a disdain that left me sickened. At that moment, I realized that the culture at Reynolds Tech needed a drastic change. The conversation left me uneasy, and as soon as the meeting ended, I went to join Mark again. He was waiting for me in the break room, and the look in his eyes told me he too had felt the tension. Did you hear that? It's like we're fighting a losing battle, he commented, fuming. We can't let this happen. We need to act before it's too late, I replied, my determination intensifying. In that instant, the world around us became more than just a company. It was a place where voices were being silenced, and I knew I needed to fight for my peers. What I didn't know was that a storm was approaching, and everyone's safety was about to be challenged. The atmosphere in the break room was charged with tension. The conversation between Julia, Mark, and I reverberated in every corner, as if the air was filled with the employees' accumulated frustrations. The smell of fresh coffee and chocolate chip cookies that Julia had brought weren't enough to dispel the cloud of discouragement that hung over us. Eddie, you have no idea what's happened here, Julia began, looking straight into my eyes. His expression was a mix of determination and sadness. There were layoffs that didn't make any sense. Dedicated employees, who had been working for years, were left aside simply because they no longer fit the desired profile. Nobody cares what we think, added Mark, nodding his head in agreement. We had a manager who simply decided that some of us were over budget. It didn't take into account the hard work we did. These decisions are made in meetings where we are absent, as if we were just numbers on a spreadsheet. I listened intently, their every word hitting my heart. It was as if a curtain was being pulled back, revealing the cruel reality my employees faced. This is unacceptable, I muttered, more to myself than to them. How can someone in power ignore the impact of their decisions on people's lives? And the worst thing, continued Julia, is that communication is terrible. When we try to bring up our concerns, we are treated as if we are complaining for no reason. Sometimes I feel like I'm screaming into an echoless well. An idea began to form in my mind, a way to help. What if we tried to create a project to improve working conditions? Something that would really show them that employee voices matter. I proposed, trying to ignite a spark of hope. Mark looked at me, enlightened by the possibility. That would be amazing, but you know some managers will resist. They don't like to be confronted. Yes, I know, I replied, feeling adrenaline course through my body. But we need to be the change we want to see. If we can come up with a solid proposal, maybe we can convince some of them to see things in a new way. Julia smiled, the first time I'd seen her smile since we started this conversation. If you can do it, I will be by your side. But, Eddie, we need data, we need stories, all this stuff we're talking about right now. The determination I felt grew with each word. We will collect information. We need testimonials, concrete examples of what is happening here. And I will take it seriously. It's time to show them that the well-being of the team must be a priority. The mood in the room had changed. Despondency was beginning to give way to hope. I'll help, Mark said, slamming his hand on the table. If we need to, we can bring together other colleagues. We are not just a company, we are a team. We agreed to meet again the next day to discuss how we could formalize our ideas. As I left the room, a sense of purpose enveloped me. I was determined to make a difference. However, when I arrived at my office, a notification on my cell phone caught my attention. It was an anonymous message. Be careful with the project. There are those who do not want to see changes. They are ready to sabotage your efforts. My heart raced. What did this mean? Sabotage? I had barely started working on the idea, and someone was already trying to undermine our efforts. What should I do? I needed to act, but with caution, as the situation was becoming more complicated than I had imagined. It was clear that resistance was closer than I thought. And now, more than ever, I needed to be crafty. The journey I had chosen was just beginning, and the shadows that surrounded Reynolds Tech were beginning to reveal themselves. I was determined to uncover the hidden truth behind the meetings and whispered conversations between Reynolds Tech managers. After hearing rumors about a corruption scheme involving bonuses and layoffs, my mind was buzzing with questions and growing indignation. That morning, I decided it was time to infiltrate the informal conversations. With a coffee in hand and Eddie's ID safely secured, I walked to the break room where the managers usually met. I hid in a corner, close to the coffee machine, and discreetly listened as they spoke. "We can't let the employees find out about the bonuses," said one of the managers, a burly man in an expensive suit. "If they know we're cutting costs and still handing out money to us, it's going to be chaos." "Exactly," replied another woman, who appeared to be the manager's assistant. "We need to keep everything under control. Layoffs are coming soon, and we need to make sure those who stay don't feel comfortable asking questions." My hands were shaking with the cup of coffee, and my heart was pounding. I was listening to everything. That conversation was the proof I needed to understand the true face of Reynolds Tech. With every word I heard, indignation grew inside me. It was time to act, but how? Later, on my lunch break, I met Julia in the outdoor area, where she used to go to take a breather and de-stress. Her look was sad, and when I sat next to her, I realized that something was bothering her. "Hey Julia, are you okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She sighed, looking at the floor. "Not really. I'm thinking about quitting my job. The stress is unbearable, and honestly, I feel like my work isn't valued." "Don't say that. You're one of the most dedicated employees I know. What's going on?" I insisted, wanting her to open up. It feels like all our efforts are in vain. And with the rumors of layoffs, I'm starting to lose faith in this company. I just want a place where my work is recognized," she said, with voice trembling. Those words cut like a knife. Here was a talented woman, ready to give up everything because she didn't feel valued. "Julia, I promise I'll do something about this. We can't let this situation continue like this." Determination grew in me, and, at the same time, responsibility increased. I had committed to understanding and helping, and now, more than ever, I needed to act. After lunch, I returned to my post and began planning how to collect more evidence about what was happening. I needed something concrete, something that couldn't be ignored. Over the next few days, I carefully observed the interactions between the managers, trying to capture any useful information. But there was a challenge: how to get the evidence without being discovered. An idea popped into my mind. What if I recorded some of these conversations? With a small recorder that I could hide in my pocket, I could capture conversations that revealed the truth. The problem was that I needed to create an environment that facilitated this. I took a moment to get closer to Mark, my friend and coworker who has always been by my side. Mark, have you heard anything about the bonuses being given to managers? I asked, hoping he could help me. He looked around, making sure no one was listening. Yes, I've heard some rumors, but I'm not sure what's true. Why? I'm thinking about collecting some evidence. We need to do something about this. We can't let the company continue down this path, I explained. Mark nodded slowly. You're right, Eddie. The situation is untenable. Let's come together and find out the truth. With Mark's help, we began to come up with a plan. The idea was simple but risky. Use the recorder in a meeting where managers would meet to discuss layoff and bonus plans. Adrenaline was running through my veins. I knew we were entering dangerous territory, but it was the only way to get the evidence I needed to confront them. That night, as I prepared for the next day, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. The truth needed to come out, and I was willing to risk everything to make it happen. The sun had barely risen when I found myself in the company cafe, a cup of hot coffee in my hands, as I watched the team move around. The atmosphere was heavy, as if a blanket of uncertainty covered Reynolds Tech beside me. Mark and Julia joined me, both with expressions that reflected the tension of the last few days. Eddie, are you sure this is a good idea? Mark asked, concern evident in his voice. He shifted in his seat, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. What if they catch us? This can be very expensive. We need to do this, Mark, I replied, trying to convey confidence. If we don't act now, we will never have the chance to change anything. It's time to expose what's going on. I knew the situation was risky, but the injustice I saw daily wouldn't leave me alone. Julia, who had been quiet until then, looked at us with determination. I support the plan. We can't let them continue doing this to us. If we can collect the evidence, we can really make a difference. The strength in his words encouraged me. It was inspiring to see how willing she was to fight for her peers, even in the face of fear. With a plan outlined, we decided to split into groups. I would stay with Mark, who had a background in technology, and we would record some of the managers' conversations during informal meetings. Julia, in turn, offered to collect testimonials from other employees who also felt insecure and undervalued. Meet here again at noon? I asked, seeking to confirm our plan. They both nodded, and we soon dispersed to our respective tasks. The following hours were intense. With Mark by my side, we would infiltrate meetings, positioning the recorder discreetly. He showed me how to use a recording app that could capture everything without raising suspicion. Just stay calm and act normal. If they see that you are tense, they will be suspicious, he advised me. When we finally entered the meeting room, the atmosphere was tense. Managers were discussing the next quarter, but soon the conversation turned to the topic we feared so much: layoffs. We need to cut costs, and that means some employees will have to leave, I heard one of the managers say, with a coldness that made me shudder. I was about to protest when Mark grabbed my arm, as if reminding me of our plan. We finished recording and met with Julia again. She had collected several testimonials, and the passion in her words was contagious. People are willing to talk, Eddie. They feel that change is possible, she said, her eyes shining with hope. We brought everything together in a presentation that we would give to a group of closest employees, those who also felt frustrated with the situation. The room was full, and the tension was palpable. When we started to present the recordings and testimonies, I could see the change in the expressions of the people around. Disbelief turned to indignation, and soon a murmur began to spread throughout the room. This is unacceptable. We cannot allow them to continue like this, shouted a colleague, and the room echoed with affirmations of support. The union that was formed there was powerful. I had never felt anything like it, a wave of collective determination that made my heart race. It was like we had finally found our voice, and the strength was growing. However, the euphoria was abruptly interrupted by a message I received on my cell phone. The screen glowed with a warning. Your true identity has been discovered. Careful. Adrenaline shot through my body. A chill running down my spine alerted me to the danger we were facing. What to do now? The fight was just beginning, and the last thing he wanted was to put everyone's safety at risk. The weight of responsibility became almost unbearable, but as I looked at the determined faces around me, I realized I couldn't give up. The revelation of my true identity hung over me like a storm about to break out. I had hoped that time would give me an advantage, but instead it had become my enemy. When I entered the meeting room, the air was thick with tension. The manager's eyes turned to me with suspicion and hostility. Among them, the corrupt manager, Daniel, crossed his arms and gave me a cold smile. "So, Eddie, or should I say Ethan Reynolds, what do you think you're doing here?" His voice was sharp like a blade. "I'm here to expose the truth, Daniel. I can no longer remain silent about what is happening at Reynolds Tech," I responded, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear pulsing in my chest. Daniel laughed, a dry, dismissive laugh. "Do you really think you can oppose what is happening here? You may have passed as an ordinary employee, but you will never be one of them. You don't know what it's like to fight for a salary, for a promotion, for a place in the sun. And you don't know what it's like to be a leader," I replied, bravery rising in me. "A leader must inspire, not intimidate. The culture you created here is destroying lives." The room was silent. Only the sound of my heart pounding echoed in my ears. Then, to my surprise, Mark stood up. I had no idea he had such a deep past. "Daniel, you can try to intimidate him, but it won't work. I know the truth. I always did." All eyes turned to Mark, who continued, "I was a fraud investigator before coming to Reynolds Tech. I had a job that required me to understand the antics of people like you. And now, I am here to expose your crimes." "Crimes?" Daniel repeated, now nervous. "You're delusional, Mark. You can't just make accusations without proof." It was at that moment that Mark, with a decisive gesture, took a flash drive from his pocket. "Here is the evidence. Recordings, emails, everything documented. His corruption scheme and unfair dismissals are recorded. The council cannot ignore this." The other managers began to murmur, anxiety spreading throughout the room. The council gathered at a table, and the tension increased. I knew this was the decisive moment. If Reynolds Tech wants a future, it needs to change. "We need transparency, respect, and accountability," I declared, looking at each board member. Daniel, now pale, tried to regain his composure. "This is a scam. You cannot believe an employee who went undercover and has no idea what really goes on in this company." "I know what happens in this company," I replied, feeling the force of truth propel me. "And I also know that employees deserve better. What we are proposing is not just a change, it is a cultural revolution. No more fear, no more corruption. It's time to empower the people who work here." The council began to stir, and one of the members, a woman named Sarah, raised her hand. "I support Ethan. He brought to light issues that many of us fear discussing. Reynolds Tech needs a fresh start." With those words, a wave of support began to form. Other council members began to agree, and Daniel realized he was losing control. He turned to me, anger in his eyes. "You're going to regret this, Ethan. You can't just erase years of corruption with a nice speech." "I'm not here to erase anything, Daniel. I'm here to build something new," I replied, feeling the determination in every word. "Reynolds Tech can become an example of ethics and leadership, but that starts now. The corrupt must be fired, and a new era of empathy and respect must be ushered in." Daniel left the room, defeated, as the atmosphere changed. The council began to discuss the evidence Mark had brought. I knew the battle was far from over, but this was the first victory. I was ready to take control of Reynolds Tech and lead a transformation we had all longed for. Change was on the way, and I was determined to be the catalyst.